For decades, Antarctica has been regarded as one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. But according to a series of extraordinary testimonies collected by Moulton Howe, something may have been discovered beneath its ice that officials allegedly never wanted the public to know about. Witnesses have described strange geometric formations buried deep below the surface, structures that seemed too precise to be natural and too ancient to have any obvious human origin. What followed were reports of restricted coordinates, unexplained military activity, communication failures, and personnel allegedly ordered to remain silent. Before we reveal what these witnesses claim they found beneath the ice, hit like and subscribe, because some say this is exactly the story powerful institutions wanted buried. Howe says she spent years gathering accounts from Navy personnel, scientists, intelligence insiders, and other alleged witnesses. Some reportedly waited decades before speaking, while others allegedly recorded their final testimonies shortly before their deaths. Their stories contain a disturbing pattern. The same locations, similar descriptions, and the same warnings about what happened after the discoveries. Now, the question is no longer simply what could be beneath Antarctica. It is why, according to these accounts, so much effort was allegedly made to keep anyone from finding out. Today, we examine the testimonies, the claims, and the mystery that refuses to disappear beneath the Antarctic ice. The year was 1982. A Navy flight engineer whose name Linda has protected to this day was on a routine supply run from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Somewhere over the ice sheet, an equipment malfunction forced the crew to set down early on an exposed ridge. Wind was hammering the fuselage, and temperatures were so low that exposed skin could burn within seconds. It was the kind of place where you fix what is broken and leave. But while the crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer looked out across the ridge and stopped. Something was wrong with the landscape. On a distant rise, shapes broke the horizon that did not belong. They were geometric, symmetrical, too regular, too angular, and too precise to be ordinary ice formations. He moved closer, close enough to see what looked like the top of a massive structure, partially exposed where wind and time had stripped the ice away. It was angular, it was solid, and it appeared to be made of something that was clearly not natural. Before he could reach it, the radio crackled. Orders came back. Return immediately to McMurdo. No explanation, no discussion. When they landed, intelligence officers were waiting. The crew was separated, debriefed individually, and told that their flight logs were now classified. They signed additional non-disclosure agreements and were given one instruction. This never happened. Now here is what you need to understand about Linda Moulton Howe. She is not a conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel. She is an Emmy award-winning investigative journalist who has spent more than 4 decades interviewing military personnel, scientists, and government officials. She built her career on documented evidence, verified credentials, and sources who could be corroborated. When the flight engineer contacted her in 1998, retired in his 70s and knowing his time was running out, she did not rush to publish. She interviewed him for hours. She verified his service record. She confirmed his credentials. His account included specific coordinates, exact dates, and the names of other crew members on that flight. Everything checked out. But Linda knew one witness was not enough, so she filed his testimony away. She told no one, and she waited. She had no idea what was about to begin. Over the next 20 years, they came to her one by one. Military personnel, scientists, contractors, people who had no connection to each other, who had never met, who had been stationed at different bases in different decades, all telling Linda pieces of the same impossible story. A geophysicist who had run ice-penetrating radar surveys sat across from Linda with his jaw tight and his voice barely above a whisper. He said he had found cavities beneath the ice. Not small pockets, but massive voids that appeared geometrically regular, far too deep and too structured to resemble natural caves. When he flagged the data, his supervisor's face went white. The readings were classified within hours. His entire team was reassigned. He never saw that data again. A Navy CB construction battalion member described being deployed to a classified excavation site miles from any official research station. There was no scientific briefing and no ice core mission, just drilling straight down. At the bottom of the shaft, he said, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Metallic structures, walls that looked manufactured, surfaces that appeared too smooth, too deliberate, and too perfect to be geological. He stared at them and thought, someone built this. A scientist from Argentina's Esperanza base told Linda that research teams occasionally pulled artifacts from ice cores that were supposedly dated to more than 12,000 years old. Every time, he claimed, military personnel arrived, confiscated the samples, and made them disappear. No logs, no reports, no published papers. Gone. A pilot who flew missions across the continent described a no-fly zone that existed on none of the public charts. It was an entire restricted area where civilian flights were forbidden and military flights required special clearance. Almost nobody knew why. When he asked a superior what was down there, the answer was short. Sensitive research. Stop asking. None of these people knew one another. None had seen Linda's other interviews. Yet, according to her accounts, every testimony pointed toward the same conclusion. Something ancient and structured was buried beneath the Antarctic ice, and multiple governments knew about it. Linda sat with all of these accounts spread across her desk and felt the weight of what she was holding. This was not one story. It was a pattern she could not ignore and could not yet prove. Then someone contacted her who changed everything. It was 2016. Linda received a message from someone she would later describe as the most credible source she had ever interviewed in her entire career. He was a retired NORAD officer with classified clearance who had allegedly been part of an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that does not appear in any public record. His identity is the one Linda has guarded more fiercely than any other. When he began talking, Linda went quiet because what he described did not merely add to the previous testimonies, it connected them. Every isolated account, every fragment, and every unexplained detail from 20 years of interviews suddenly seemed to lock into place like pieces of a machine clicking together. According to his account, based on what he was briefed on and what he personally witnessed beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there are multiple structures of artificial origin, not geological anomalies, not ice formations, not anything that belongs in a conventional geology textbook. These, he said, were structures built by someone, engineered with intention and precision, and far older than the ice that buried them. They allegedly predate the last ice age, meaning they were constructed when Antarctica was supposedly a green, temperate continent, with rivers and forests more than 12,000 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. More than 12,000 years. That would place these structures thousands of years before Sumer, thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty, and thousands of years before any civilization commonly described as ancient. He told Linda that these structures were first detected in the 1940s during Operation Highjump, the massive 1946-1947 Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, the mission was about establishing research bases and training personnel for polar conditions. According to this source, however, the classified reality was something else entirely. Seismic surveys had allegedly picked up anomalies deep beneath the ice that no one could explain and no one was supposed to discuss. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Since then, for more than 7 decades, the United States, Russia, and more recently China have allegedly been conducting covert recovery operations across Antarctica. Not research, recovery. Archaeological excavation and technological retrieval conducted entirely separate from the public scientific programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. The structures, he told Linda, are not small. They are not a simple outpost. What has allegedly been found appears to be an extensive urban complex with buildings, infrastructure, and technology, suggesting a civilization so advanced that it would challenge nearly every assumption we hold about human history. Some areas are supposedly accessible through natural ice caves where shifting glaciers have created openings. Others are allegedly reached through drilling operations disguised as routine scientific research. And the technology being pulled from these structures, pay close attention to this, is said to still work. Not all of it is understood, but functional devices have allegedly been recovered and are currently being studied at classified facilities. Linda asked the question any journalist would ask. Prove it. The officer allegedly provided coordinates. He provided internal documents, partially redacted, showing classified project designations at the exact locations he described. He also gave her names, including other personnel supposedly involved in these operations, people she could locate and contact. But the thing Linda could not stop thinking about was the silence on the other end of her own mind. 20 years of scattered testimonies had just become one story, and that story was bigger than anything she had ever investigated. What she did not know yet was that the most disturbing testimony was still coming. A military contractor who had worked on a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda, but only because he was dying. His cancer was terminal, and he did not want to take what he had seen to the grave. He described being lowered into an ice shaft drilled to access what his briefing called a geological anomaly. The descent was slow. The platform creaked beneath his weight as it dropped deeper into the shaft, foot by foot. The daylight above shrank to a bright coin and then to nothing. The walls were ice, white and blue-veined, featureless and endless. The cold was total. The only sounds were the hum of the winch and his own breathing echoing through the shaft. Then, more than a mile down, something changed. The ice stopped, not gradually. It ended. The wall shifted to something smooth, almost metallic. A surface with a faint sheen caught his headlamp, a surface that appeared to have no business being more than a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature felt different. The acoustics changed. Even the air seemed different, as though he had stepped from one room into another. He stepped off the platform into a cavity that, according to his testimony, was clearly unmistakably not natural. The space opened around him. It was enormous. There were markings on the walls, symbols and geometric patterns, unlike any writing system anyone on his team had ever seen. The group stood in silence, flashlights cutting through a darkness that had allegedly not been disturbed for thousands of years. And then he saw it. Set into the far wall was a doorway, not a crack, not a gap, a constructed entrance, framed and deliberate, leading somewhere deeper. His hands were shaking. He could feel his pulse in his throat. The team was not authorized to go farther. That required a clearance level none of them held. But he watched as scientists and military personnel in specialized equipment prepared to enter. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this before. He was sent back to the surface. He was paid a substantial bonus. He signed a non-disclosure agreement threatening criminal prosecution. And he carried what he had seen in silence for years until the cancer diagnosis made secrecy feel meaningless. He told Linda, "People should know we found something down there, something that changes everything we think we know about history." Now listen to what else Linda's investigation supposedly turned up, because the testimonies did not stop. They accelerated. A satellite imagery analyst told her he had watched certain Antarctic coordinates get digitally scrubbed from public data, not merely reduced in resolution, but actively obscured, blurred, and erased. He claimed he had seen the originals before processing, rectilinear shapes and formations that looked engineered. He sat at his desk staring at structures that should not exist. When he raised the issue with supervisors, he was told those areas were under special access protocols and that it was not his concern. A materials scientist who briefly analyzed samples from Antarctic recovery operations described alloys that supposedly matched nothing in any known database. Corrosion resistance was allegedly off the charts. Strength-to-weight ratios supposedly seemed impossible. Manufacturing signatures were said to be beyond anything modern technology could replicate. A logistics coordinator for the NSF Antarctic program reportedly found equipment manifests that matched no known research mission, industrial excavation tools, sealed transport containers with armed military escorts, and shipments routed through Department of Defense channels entirely outside scientific oversight. Every new witness added something more unsettling than the last, symbols carved into walls that no linguist on any team could decode. Electronic equipment that supposedly went haywire near certain excavation sites, with instruments spinning and readings spiking from electromagnetic interference with no identifiable source. And then came the claim that sent shockwaves through Linda's entire network. Multiple sources allegedly confirmed that recovered artifacts had been transported to classified U.S. facilities for reverse engineering. Not study, reverse engineering. The picture was no longer fragmentary, it was enormous, and according to Linda, it was screaming to be told. By 2020, Linda says she had more than 15 credible testimonies, verified coordinates, confirmed names and affiliations, and a body of evidence that, taken together, pointed to one of the most consequential secrets in modern history. And then her sources began dying, one by one. The people who had trusted her with the most dangerous secrets of their lives were running out of time. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the one who started all of this with a phone call in 1998, died in 2019. Linda received the news and sat with it in silence. Then, the NORAD officer, her most important source, the man whose testimony had allegedly connected 2 decades of scattered accounts into one staggering picture, died in 2022. Others were in steep decline, in hospital beds and hospice care, memories fading. And Linda, now in her 80s, understood something with brutal clarity. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of these testimonies together, the last thread connecting the witnesses to the world. That realization changed her. It did not simply motivate her, it terrified her. Because if she waited any longer, 25 years of investigation, the life's work of a dozen dying men who had chosen truth over silence would vanish as though none of it had ever happened. She said in a 2023 interview, "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survive." In late 2023, she began assembling what she calls the Comprehensive Antarctic Report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, and every piece of evidence gathered across 25 years of investigation. In early 2024, she released portions through Earth Files. Commerce, she published specific coordinates where witnesses reportedly described exposed structures or underground access points. She shared declassified Operation Highjump documents with redacted sections that, according to her interpretation, hinted at objectives far beyond ordinary research stations. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough credential information to establish credibility. She compiled satellite imagery showing alleged artificial data obscuration over the exact areas her sources identified. And she made a direct challenge. Other nations have satellites. Independent researchers have ice-penetrating radar. Scientists work on that continent every single day. If these testimonies are true, the evidence is there. She told the world where to look. Now here's the part that keeps me up at night. The response from every implicated government was supposedly identical. Total, absolute silence. No denials, No corrections, no lawsuits, no charges, no official statement of any kind, nothing. Just silence so complete, according to Linda, that it felt deliberate because it was. Think about that. An Emmy Award-winning journalist publicly accuses multiple world governments of running a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology beneath Antarctic ice, and not a single government says a word, not one official denial. Linda says that silence is the loudest confirmation she could have received. If she were lying, she argues, discrediting her would be easy. A single official statement could end it. But addressing her investigation would force a choice no government wants to make. Either confirm what she is revealing or explain why dozens of military and scientific personnel are supposedly fabricating the same story. So they say nothing, and the silence grows louder. Independent researchers began digging. Amateur satellite analysts examined her coordinates and reported anomalies. Scientists submitted requests for historical radar data from the areas she identified. Most requests were allegedly denied, classified as national security material, even for geological data from a continent supposedly dedicated to peaceful scientific research. One former Antarctic station worker came forward publicly to support Linda's claims, stating what anyone who has worked on that continent for extended periods already knows. There are areas you do not go, questions you do not ask, and classified military operations that have nothing to do with science happening alongside the public research programs. What makes this story so unsettling is not simply the idea of something hidden beneath Antarctica. It is what it could mean for everything we think we know about human history. If even part of these claims were true, it would suggest that an advanced civilization may have existed more than 12,000 years ago, long before ancient Egypt, Sumer, or any civilization most of us learn about in history books. That would completely alter the timeline of human development. Instead of civilization slowly progressing step by step, it could imply that advanced knowledge once existed, was lost during some ancient catastrophe, and is only now being rediscovered in secret. According to Linda Moulton Howe, this is exactly why so many witnesses eventually came forward. Many were military personnel, scientists, contractors, and intelligence officials who claimed they had seen strange structures, unexplained technology, or classified operations connected to Antarctica. Most stayed silent for decades because they feared losing their careers, breaking security agreements, or simply being ridiculed. But as they grew older, many reportedly felt they could no longer keep the secret to themselves. Linda says she spent years carefully documenting every testimony, recording interviews, collecting evidence, and verifying the backgrounds of the people who contacted her. Now, at 81 years old, she is working on a full documentary that will present all of the testimonies together for the first time. She has also placed copies of her investigation, including information from witnesses who gave permission to be identified after death, with multiple institutions. Her goal is to make sure the material survives, no matter what happens to her. What makes her message powerful is that she is not demanding blind belief. She openly tells people to examine the testimonies themselves and decide what they think. In her words, these were real people with real experience and professional backgrounds, not anonymous internet rumors. And if even some of their stories are true, then the world may be far stranger than most of us realize. Most of the witnesses are gone now, but their accounts remain recorded and preserved. Linda believes she made a promise to them, and after decades of silence, she finally decided to share what they told her. But one big question still remains. If governments truly knew about mysterious structures beneath Antarctica for decades, why keep them secret? And if discoveries connected to an ancient lost civilization were being studied behind closed doors, what else could still be hidden from the public? That unanswered question is what makes this mystery so fascinating. Whether these claims are true, exaggerated, or simply misunderstood, the possibility that our understanding of history may be incomplete continues to capture the imagination of millions around the world. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who loves mysteries, hidden history, and unexplained discoveries. Because sometimes the biggest mysteries are the ones that leave us with the most questions.